Hey y'all, it's Jude. It's just me today, solo one. And this is also gonna be a bit more of like a casual video. I mean, not like our other videos are like super high production, scripted. But this is like extremely off the cuff. Um, One sec, I'm moving my phone out of my pocket. Um, it's super off the cuff. It has to do with something that happened today, which is the Kelly Boyle TV Insider article comparing the Louis Lestat relationship with the Mark Gemma relationship from Severance. the Upon seeing the title, it pissed me off. And the reason why I'm here talking to everybody today is because Amari has not watched the second season of Severance. He's not as into it as I am. I'm very into Severance. But we both felt like this was important to talk about because some things that came up in that article I thought were very emblematic of a lot of the racist conversations that have happened in the show, things that we've already talked about in our podcast that came out, and things that actually because I edit the podcasts, and things that when I was listening to our upcoming podcast about Louis also came up. And all of these things are in conversation with each other, but I really wanted to get on this because I've seen the conversations that have been started with it, and it feels like even those who oppose the article or have issues with it aren't really quite hitting, from what I've seen. There may be other people who have said this already and said it better, but from what I've personally seen, haven't really hit the beats on it that I feel like need to be hit, because there is a lot of nuance to this conversation, and honestly there is a lot of like racial and racist, context and implications that are being put forth that honestly it just feels like weren't taken into consideration when writing this article, and I think that's really irresponsible for someone who presents themselves as an entertainment journalist, especially with the themes that are really coming up in Severance season 2 and also all of Interview with the Vampire. So like, I guess like briefly summarize, just to like be like, this is where I'm coming from. For those of you who haven't read the article, whatever. But for those of you who haven't read the article, it is comparing the Louis and Lestat relationship to the Mark and Gemma relationship, and trying to claim that both of these shows are so emotionally impactful because they are at their core about these tragic romances. And I right off the bat disagree with that assessment, that that's what those two shows are about. I feel like both Interview with the Vampire and Severance are more about exploitation and abuse of power. And like, do they have these romances in them? Yes. But do I think that they are the point? No, not at all. Or at the very least, it's less about the romance and more about the more about connection. So to kind of get into it, sorry, I've said that already, but like to get into it a little bit more, Gemma's storyline was brought up, and there was parallels being made both to Lestat and Gemma and Louis and Gemma that I felt weren't. It was very like honestly piss poor analysis. And one of the ways that I felt that it was not a good analysis is that Lumen as an entity is not analogous to Armand as a person, because Lumen keeps being compared to, or like Gemma's imprisonment by Lumen keeps being compared to Louis' relationship with Armand. And I think the most important part to talk about is the different levels of consent. where we could see that Gemma was preyed upon by the fertility clinic that she chose to go to. That was very clearly a front for Lumen, because they were sending her those cards that we saw O&D making in season 1. And then, you know, they faked her death. They had her put in this underground facility where they're continuing to test like multi-severance, like how much can you split a consciousness before it like testing the bounds of a multi-split or multi-severed consciousness. And I think one of the things I haven't seen a lot of people bring up, once again, this may just literally be that I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen a lot of people bring up the connotations of sexual abuse regarding Gemma's circumstances. And because those implications exist, how problematic it is to compare that to the Louis and Armand relationship, and how problematic it is to compare Armand to the Lumen Corporation. Namely, the moment I immediately got it from, like, these, like, like, you know, vibes, was when Gemma went to the dentist. And she was very apprehensive. And then when she comes out of it and they ask her, like, what do you remember? And she's like, she relates as, like, this is the room that makes my mouth hurt. But she doesn't know what went on in that room. She just feels the bodily after effects. And to me, all I could think of was all of those accounts of women who had been sexually assaulted by their dentists after being put under for routine dental procedures. Especially because we know that the Lumen guy, who was kind of, like, assigned to her, had a, like, romantic fixation on her. And then you have that other room where she's doing the thank you cards over and over again until her wrist hurts, where he is pretending to be her husband. And there's that really gross moment where he makes her say, I love you. And it's, like, really gross. Especially with at the end of the episode, when, forgive me, I don't remember the name of that employee, but when that same guy is trying to convince Gemma that Mark has moved on in her absence, and that she should move on too, and in a way that implies he's making an advance on her. And to compare that to Armand, when that is not the same situation at all, Louis chose to be with Armand. Now, we can have a conversation about how informed his consent was. Would he have chosen to be with Armand if he knew that he was the director of the play and not just a reluctant participant of the play? We can't really say. But there is this way in which people portray Armand as this sexual deviant, this sexual predator preying on Louis, and also in a way like a creep stalking and sexually preying on Lestat, being a sex pest in general. That is really troubling when we look at race. Because I think race is inextricable, like, from these characters. Like, you have to take it into account. So, to paint a South Asian man in that particular light, especially I think in this political moment, is racist. Honestly, it's very racist. And then to also compare being multi-severed the way that Gemma is to the one canonical instance of mind control that we have. I say mind control, it isn't even mind control. It's Armand using the mind gift to remove this memory, which we also know is not a, like, ironclad procedure, because all you have to do to break the mind wipe, this, like, redaction by the mind gift, is to talk about it, which in my opinion is, like, it's metaphorical, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not completely gone, it's there, but it's been repressed. Repressed memories caused by gaslighting, all that jazz. So it is very different, in my opinion. And also, the difference between Gemma and Louis is that Gemma can't leave. The minute she goes up that elevator, she becomes Miss Casey, and she is sent back down with no memory of why she was trying to leave. She doesn't have an idea of what time it is. She doesn't know why she's there. She just knows she's standing in this hallway now, and then she's sent back down to be turned into Gemma again, who doesn't understand why she's down there again. Where Louis can leave. And, like, this isn't me, like, minimizing the abusive elements of the Louis and Armand relationship. There are absolutely abusive elements of that relationship. But Louis can leave. We saw it at the end of season 2. Louis confronts Armand, and he leaves, and he tells Armand to pack his shit and leave. Like, that is a very different situation than the one that Gemma finds herself in. And it is to portray Louis as needing to be saved from his evil brown captor, and to be rescued or to return to his true love, this white guy, is very fucked up, in my opinion. And to compare it to the Mark and Gemma relationship is very different as well. Because also, let's be so honest, Louis was aware of 95% of what the situation was in regards to Armand's participation in the trial. He knows that he knew it was happening. He knows that he knew that he set them up. He knows that he knew he was there. And he knows that he knew he could have stopped it. But he thinks that Armand used all of his strength to save him, when we learned that Armand used none of his strength to do anything. And that is the key difference. But also, going on to that, because that just reminded me, in that article, I have the article over here, which is why I'm looking over here. The thing that pissed me off in that article the most, that made me close it initially when I first read it, is the fact that Kelly Boyle starts to talk about the book, The Vampire Lestat, when doing a show analysis. And we already said this in our podcast for the first episode of our podcast, which is out on our YouTube channel. But it really, really, really irritates me whenever people pull book evidence to talk about the show. If it hasn't happened on the show yet, if we haven't seen it happen on the show yet, then I don't think it is relevant to pull something from the book as a parallel, because we don't know that happened. We don't know what the writers are going to do with that. So when we have people pulling stuff from The Vampire Lestat, I think it's also really important that when we talk about that moment in The Vampire Lestat and the book Interview with the Vampire, Lestat is way worse off in the book than he was in the show. All Lestat got in the show was poisoned and his throat slit, whereas in the book he was also set on fire, so he was a lot weaker. So they would have had to do a lot more to keep him in this weakened state, whereas in the show, he's pretty strong. He's pretty healthy. He's actually very healthy. It's not the same situation. We see it's not the same situation. So, like, when we talk about the show, we have to talk about the show. We can't talk about the books when they are not relevant to what is happening on the show. And, like, I don't know how many times that has to be hammered home, but it's also really shitty analysis to bring up something that isn't relevant yet when you're trying to do a media analysis about a relationship on a show, to bring up unrelated material at this current time. What happened in The Vampire Lestat is not relevant unless it's been mentioned in the show. End of sentence. End of sentence. Also, I think what's really important, because, like, when we're talking about the themes, like what I said earlier, what both shows are kind of speaking to, it's not about this romance. And there was a tweet I wish I could find, but it was, and we did mention this in our upcoming podcast. I think I literally quoted this in our upcoming podcast, that it's like, but it's, a lot of you are watching Severance like it's the summer I turned pretty or something. And I had said a lot of people are watching Interview with the Vampire like it's Twilight, because they're really centering romance when, like I had said, Severance is about the exploitation of people, of vulnerable people, and abusive power dynamics. We've seen this season, I feel like a lot, even like a more honed social commentary where it's like the exploitation of women, of the exploitation of people of color. We see it in, like, I think we definitely saw it in season 1 with that one woman who got severed so she could have children and not have to remember the pain of, like, giving birth. Because now she has an innie who only knows the pain of childbirth. Which is horrible, horrible. Forced birth. Oh, like, your innie can't consent to getting pregnant, and now your innie has to give birth. And then we kind of see with Gemma the exploitation of women of color, how she is being forced, like, turned into a lab rat. She's a test subject for the betterment of science, and we have to also remember that Lumen is a medical research company. They started with medicine. There is, like, a real historical context for, like, medical science to use people of color as test subjects for medical procedures or for medicines, and to have these horrible, horrible results, like, happen, or, like, effects happen to them as a result. So showing Gemma be this guinea pig, and also showing Gemma, an Asian woman, in a position where she's forced into subservience a lot of the time, especially in that one bit where she has, like, a husband. It's really weird. It's very, to me, racialized, the oppression she faces at Lumen. And, like, I don't see enough people talking about that. And then we also see it with, like, the infantilization of Helly by both her innie and the world around her, where she is referred to as a child. All the innies are referred to as children, but there's something about the way that Helly, who really only just wants autonomy, she wants to be able to choose what she does, she wants to be able to choose what she wears, to have, like, a say in the things that happen to her body, but she doesn't have that say. And then we also see what's happening with Milchick this season, where it's about very much, like, corporate racism and all of these things happening in his storyline, because this is a very white company, and in a lot of ways there's big Christian cult vibes from this organization, and a lot of those spaces that are Christian nationalism and white supremacy go hand in hand. So trying to operate in this system that is not made for you, it's very much not intended for Milchick. So when you see him get those paintings where they, like, we want to have you see yourself in the company, and they give him blackface portraits, and he's made very uncomfortable by it, and he, like, hides them and puts them up on that shelf, and he's trying to talk with Natalie about the portraits, but you can see that she is having to compartmentalize herself, and just completely ignores the fact that she's a black woman. Because, like, but you can also tell that she's not happy. But it's like having to erase your race in order to make it in this, industry, in order to make it in this, world. Especially because it's heavily implied that Milchick is also indoctrinated the way that Cobell was, and the way that Miss Huang is. So, existing in this structure, existing in this white supremacist structure, and trying to find your way in it, and trying to, like, having to do more, to commit more, to pledge yourself more in order to be seen at all. And this is a little bit of a divergence, but it's like, I want it to be, like, clear, like, these are the storylines that are being had, and, like, yes, there's romance, whatever, but also, like, if you want to be uncharitable, the way that I feel like these comparisons in this article were made very slapshod, we could also say any Mark does not care as much about getting Gemma as he does about being with Helly. He's trying to move on. He doesn't he straight up says when they're just like, you don't want to save your wife, and he's like, that's not my wife, that's my Audie's wife. And like the way he sees things, and the way that Helly also sees things, is that the things that your Audie does, your Audie's life, is not your life. That's not you, right? Like, this is a separate entity who's making those choices, and it's like, I'm in here making my own choices, and I am a separate person from them. I have my own independence, I have my own autonomy, and I deserve to have a say. And so we could say, with that, Louis like Mark S. at the end of, like when we see in Paris, and he's choosing to forget his previous relationship and pursue something new and to be a different person. Try something new and not be beholden to this past anymore. To make new choices, to explore avenues. What does he like? What does he want to do? Because that's also a big question for Louis throughout all of season 2. We see Claudia ask him that question in the cafe, which is, who are you, Louis? And then Louis is like, I'm your brother. And then she's like, well, who are you outside of me? If there was no me, if there was no him, who would you be? So we could say that Louis going off with Armand is the same thing as any Mark having a relationship with Heliar, where it's like defining myself not by my Audie, but by who I am. Trying to discover who am I. But also, if we're being so for real, I don't think that that's a good parallel either, because these relationships aren't similar. These situations aren't similar. And this is such a ham-fisted commentary. Like, it's just not anything. It's not anything. Like, I was trying not to go full hater mode, but I just can't help it, because, like, the comparisons to be made between these two shows, I think there could be a conversation to be had, but not if you want to prioritize shipping. I think with these two shows, shipping as a proxy for meaningful analysis will always ring hollow. Like, it is not the avenue with which to explore these characters, to explore these storylines, to explore these, dynamics. It's not the right avenue for it. And the minute we all accept that, and we can talk about these relationships, I'm not saying we can't talk about these relationships, but to act like the show is only about these relationships. This is not the Lou Stott romance show. It is the seasons 1 and 2 are about Louis' life. It's about Louis' biography. And yes, is Lestat a prominent part of that biography? Of course. But he is not the sun with which, like, Louis orbits. There's other influences on his life, and if we want to talk about a love story at the center of Interview with the Vampire, it's not a romantic one, it's a platonic one, it's the familial one between Louis and Claudia, between Louis and Paul. These are the two anchors. These are the two anchors with which Louis orbits, with like these 2 points that Louis always comes back to, and that is emphasized by the end of season 2, where Louis is in his meditation room, I call it his reflection room. I don't know if that's the name for it. I think it is. I don't remember. But and in there is a portrait of Paul, the portrait of Paul from his home, and Claudia's yellow dress. That is it. Those are the two things that lie at the center of Louis, and like the two loving relationships that Louis really comes back to over and over again. It's Paul, his brother, and it's Claudia, his daughter. And to try and twist it to make it about Louis and Lestat, I think it goes back to the fact that a lot of people don't see Louis as his own character. They see Louis as an accessory for Lestat, and what they really want to do is talk about Lestat, but they throw Louis in there as a bone to be like, oh, well, I guess I'm not just going to talk about the white guy. I guess maybe I'll talk about the main character a little bit, because Louis is the main character of Interview with the Vampire. At the very least, he's the main character of seasons 1 and 2. It's his story. We follow his point of view. We're put in his mind. We're made to empathize with him. He is it. He is the vampire. He is the titular vampire in Interview with the Vampire. So when we have these conversations about themes, to try and make it about a ship so that you can actually talk about the white guy, or to villainize, and I'm not saying that Armand isn't a villain, but Lestat is also a villain in the book Interview with the Vampire, and by extension, the show. They are dual antagonists. Are they also dual romantic interests? Yes, because it's that kind of thing. But they're both antagonists in Louis's life, and to try and erase Lestat's sins, absolve him of his sins, in order to focus on all the things that Armand's done wrong, does everybody a disservice and exposes you as being racist. Let's be so for real. Let's be so for real. And everyone's gonna try and excuse themselves of being like, what do you mean I'm racist? I love Louis. Who cares? Who fucking cares? Like, that's not enough. You say you care about Louis, but can you do a meaningful analysis without bringing up Lestat? Like, can we actually talk about this? Can we, like, actually get into it? The abuse that Louis sustains at Armand's hand is not anything as fantastical as constant mental subjugation. It is simply regular old gaslighting. Like, and I think to elevate that and to make it seem like Armand made it so Louis never had a say or was never able to understand the situation that he was in is not correct. And I think to play up Armand's abuse to minimize Lestat's abuse is foolish. And not the point. It's not the point. Lestat was abusive. Armand was abusive. They were both abusive. And why are you, like, going hard to absolve your favorite abuser? That's not what the point is. The point is that both of these guys aren't shit. At the end of the day, neither Armand nor Lestat are shit. They were shitty partners. They did shitty things to Louis and Claudia. They both utilized anti-blackness to subjugate and abuse their partner. That's it at the end of the day. And to make it seem like one of these is this big tragic romance because fucking Louis got shoved into a fucking tower guarded by the evil witch that is Armand is so boring. It's so boring. Especially when Lumond is also a tragic romance. They really could have worked out, I feel. But, like, the problem is Armand. Armand fucks up every situation because he preemptively thinks he's lost. He goes into it thinking he's already, lost the person. And so whenever they show any sign of not being completely thrilled with him, he's like, I'm gonna kill myself. And I'm gonna destroy this relationship, and I guess they don't love me. Because what we see in episode 6, at the dinner with Louis and Armand and Claudia and Madeleine, when Madeleine says to Louis, like, why don't you want him to know how much you love him? And Louis is very shy about it. And Armand having that outside confirmation that from Madeleine that Louis loves him, I think really fucked him up. We see his face when he's, giving the signal for the rest of the Coven members, when he's stepping away and freezing the cafe for them to take, Louis, Claudia, and Madeleine, that it's like, shit. Because he did all this because he thought that Louis didn't love him. He did all this because he felt that he couldn't depend on Louis and Louis's relationship, and so he went back to what was familiar, which was the Coven, which he's not thrilled about, but it's consistent. And it's his own insecurities, because Louis would have taken great care of him. Like, Louis is a very nurturing person. He's a very caring person, and they could have, I think, provided everything the other needs, because Armand also offers something that Louis didn't have in his relationship with Lestat, which is consistency as well. Like, Armand is very consistent. What's the fucking line from season 1? I know it's about, like, Armand's Rashid facade, but I also think it's very true about Armand himself. Metronomic. He is, you can depend on him to do what it is he's gonna do. And That's my cat. She's trying to look out the window. One sec. He is very consistent. And I feel that that consistency is something that Louis craved, and that's why that is one of a couple of reasons of why he's drawn to Armand and why they lasted for 77 years. And yes, did it get routine after a while? Did it get a little boring? Yeah, but then they continued for another fucking, 30 years. So, it is what it is. The problem with their relationship is that Armand preemptively doomed it by being insecure. And that is a tragedy because they do really care about each other and they do really love each other. But no one ever wants to talk. No one's writing these think pieces about the tragic romance of Louis and Armand. It's always the tragic romance of Louis and Lestat because no one gives a shit about Armand and Louis's relationship because honestly no one gives a shit about Armand and Louis. Because they're an interracial relationship that does not include a white man. You have to care about two people of color. I'm so sorry. And that's really what it is. That's really what it is, I think, at the heart of this. This whole ramble, I think, ultimately, culminates to how white people will purposefully misunderstand and misinterpret and twist the character traits of characters of color in order to serve their white fave or to prop up their white fave. And the characterizations they do are gross mischaracterizations that fundamentally fuck up the plot because you want to get into shipping. And I'm not saying you can't ship. I ship. We all ship. But you can't let shipping overshadow actual, real, concrete shit. You can't let it allow you to not see the story for what it is, and you certainly can't use it as a smokescreen for being fucking racist. You just can't. In conclusion, because I'm going to try and wrap up everything that I said, because I did just kind of go off. There's no script. I'm sure you could figure that out. But I'm going to try and synthesize all this info. Synthesize everything I said. Make a TLDR version, which is this article, to me, is the culmination of a couple of mindsets that have run rampant in the Interview with the Vampire fandom. If you hear my cat run around, mind your business. Which is the gross mischaracterization of characters of color, of themes, and of the narrative, and of the interpersonal dynamics between multiple characters, in order to prop up Lestat, specifically. Because there was no reason to write this article if not to just gush about Lestat, to try to absolve Lestat of his sins that are his, and to only talk about Armand's abuse while refusing to acknowledge that it's Lestat's abuse that led them into this whole situation in the first place. If Lestat hadn't been a horribly abusive partner, which he was, we all saw season 1, Claudia would not have had to kill him. Louis would not have had to kill him. Whatever. In order to escape that house. They would not have ever been in Paris. Claudia wouldn't have died if Lestat hadn't driven them to where they were by being an abusive partner and by being an abusive parent. That's on him. So to completely erase those elements from the story, to exaggerate Armand's existing abusive tendencies to make him seem like this puppet master, this evil creature holding Louis hostage in a relationship against his will, when we see that that is not the case. Louis chose to be with Armand. We see him choose Armand at the end of season 2. well, we see him choose Armand in episode 8. And they stayed together for almost 8 decades, right? Louis chose to be there. We can argue about how informed that consent is, but like I said, he knew 95% of Armand's shit when it came to the trial. Whereas Mark knew very little, purposefully, about what it is that Lumen does outside of they are a medical research facility. We know that Gemma knew nothing about the fact that Lumen was controlling the fertility clinic. Or at least, it's not very clearly expressed. It's not they're like, these people are trying to get you to sign up for unethical medical testing. Like, she knew nothing. Mark knew nothing. Louis knew a lot. And I think that's really important. And honestly, it takes away from Louis' agency for you to do that. Louis has agency. This is a moment, a decision in which Louis has agency. And it's being taken away from him. There's not many moments in which Louis has agency in this show. But Louis chooses Armand. And it honestly just feels like tearing down one ship in order to prop up your favorite. When coming at this particular show from the point of view of shipping is almost worthless. Because Louis and Lestat, that's an abusive relationship. Lestat is abusive to Louis. Louis and Armand, that's an abusive relationship. Armand is abusive to Louis. And we have to accept both of those realities. And we have to accept that to do this abuser Olympics, who is worse, who is better, is not useful commentary or useful analysis either, because what it does is it decenters the victim, which is Louis. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this type of article, this type of analysis, these types of conversations decenter Louis and recenter Lestat by focusing on only the Louis and Lestat relationship and make that the core of the show when it is not. If the show is about anything, it's about grief. And the grief, and like that, she says that in the article, but she misses the mark because the grief is about Louis losing Claudia, about everything Louis did and all the things that happened to both of them that led up to Louis losing Claudia, Louis losing his daughter, Louis losing his sister, his family. That is what it's about. And to make it about a tragic romance is fucking stupid. Anyway, that's all I have to say. If you liked this, subscribe to the channel. We have a podcast coming out later this week. Follow all of our socials are in the description. Do with that what you will. Have a nice night. Goodbye.